It is almost 10 o'clock in the evening on January the 1st, and I am about to embark on my second read of 2020. Yeah, I bet that second in the title kind of confused you because I never put up number one, but don't worry, it's coming. I just don't have a lot of stuff to say about nonfiction books without recounting the entire book. So it's just better to keep it short, and because this month in particular I'm planning on doing a lot of nonfiction reading, I'm gonna compile it into one video at the end. But now, my second book of the month is going to be a Lynsay Sands book. I feel like I've earned it. Also, it just came in for the library hold, so there's that. It's the last book in the Argino series that I have yet to read until she later this year puts out another one, because I know she will. It's called The Trouble with Vampires. I'm reading them a little bit out of order, and it came out last year, and I always fall into these books, so I am very much looking forward to giving you up-to-date information about this one. What I love about Lynsay Sands is her humor. I love the Argino series because it's a really unique take on vampires. They're not really vampires. They are genetically enhanced humans who happen to have capabilities that one associates with vampires. And each of these immortals has a life mate or multiple potential life mates, but it takes a long time to cross paths with them. So by the time they cross paths with one of their life mates, they pretty much want that to work. So each of the books in this Argino series, the book that I'm about to read is number 29, deals with one of these immortals finding their life mate and falling in love and convincing their life mate to stay with them forever and always. What I like is that we're on book 29. I've already read book 30, which was amazing. Probably my favorite in the series so far, actually. But this book could change that. Lynsay Sands somehow manages to make each book really unique with the way that they meet, especially the later books. They've all just got such a unique plot, and considering this is the 29th book and I've read the 30th book, that I consider to be quite a feat. So these books have romance, they have world building, they have a lot of humor, and they have a lot of action, which I really like about them as well. There's always some kind of either a thriller or a mystery sort of element to them. At least the later ones do. It's been so long that I really cannot comment on those first few. I have not reread this series. I've just kind of read it all the way through over several years. So what is this book about? What is The Trouble with Vampires about? I actually didn't look at the blurb, so I can't tell you at all. But I will tell you tomorrow after I finish reading a chunk of it. Yes, I changed into my pajamas. Don't judge me. I am not quite 2 hours into the audiobook of The Trouble with Vampires. I like the narrator so far. So this book is about a woman named Pet, and her nephew, Parker, who believes that his neighbor is being held hostage by a man who thinks he's a vampire. Now, when he calls 911, the actual vampires or immortals are always keeping an eye on the 911 calls, just so that they can actually send enforcers to the ones that are legitimate or suspected to be legitimate. So they sent out a couple people just to check things out and see if this is a crank call or if this is something that needs attention. And the two people who were sent out were Marguerite and her husband, Julian. If you've read the series, you know Marguerite and Julian from not only a previous book, but all of her children, and I think all of his children now, have had romances in subsequent books. Now we're kind of on to extended friends and family of the Arginos, although the Arginos are very large in number because they're immortal. In any case, this book is about Petrella and Julian's nephew Santo. Now, this book comes on the heels of one of the little arcs that connect several of the books together. Another thing that I love about the Argino series is that there are some books in the series that are standalone, and then there are some books in the series that are connected through a plot point that goes through several books. And this happens to be one of the former. I'm saying kind of, because the book before this one, that plot point with that villain was somewhat wrapped up. The main villain ended up getting away, so it's kind of open-ended. And in this book, they think that that villain happens to be the vampire next door keeping the old man hostage. So they brought Santo in and a couple other enforcers just as backup, because Santo has seen the villain Drexler, and they want to have him look at and identify this vampire so that if it is this big villain that everybody's looking for, they can take him down. And even if it's just a rogue immortal, they can apprehend him. So far in this book, we've been introduced to Parker and Pet. And Parker's initial 911 call was dismissed as a prank call. But whenever Pet puts Parker to bed, she's his aunt, and she's taking care of him for the week because his parents, who are both doctors, are away on business. So as she's going to check in on him, she sees this figure lurking outside and trying to get into the house, and she freaks and calls 911, which they actually take seriously, I'm glad. And meanwhile, the immortals next door also see this and decide to come rushing and help, but they don't apprehend whoever it is. So we're thick in the part of the book that's leading up to the thriller / mystery aspect, because I'm sure that's not going to be the end that we see of this mysterious vampire figure. There's been a couple things that have been laid down as to the sort of things that this vampire has been getting up to, and it definitely sounds like a rogue immortal type of thing. And now we're starting to get into the thick of the romance element. Now, Pet doesn't actually trust any of these immortals, and I love it, because usually, I mean, they're very nice people, so most of the time, or a lot of the time, whenever somebody meets Marguerite and the family, they wind up trusting them. But Pet notices the silvery glint in all of their eyes, which is an indication that they are immortals. And so from the get-go, even though she's attracted to Santo, and even though she likes Marguerite and Julian and the other two well enough, she doesn't quite trust them. So this next part is going to be really interesting, I'm sure it is. Is this spoiler time? I don't think so. I'm early enough in the book that I don't think this will come as much of a surprise. It's not really much of a twist either. The reason that Pet is so on her guard and noticing things like Marguerite's eyes is because she's actually had some encounter with immortals before. And she's had this encounter with some immortals that are apparently in the Brass Circle. I've never heard of the Brass Circle in any of these books before, so I'm super excited about it. I want to learn more about this. Apparently they're rogues, which is less exciting, but it's some new aspect to the world building, which, you know, after 29 books, I'm interested in seeing what else Lynsay Sands has thought up in the interim. So yeah, onward. So, it is now day 2 of 2020, and I feel like I'm having a pretty good year so far, reading-wise. I'm just over 3 hours into The Trouble with Vampires, and of course I love the lightheartedness of these books. Like, the first kiss between Santo and Pet is when she walks in on him in the kitchen, and he's this huge guy, and he's got on this frilly apron because they're in a borrowed house, and he's washing the dishes with a blood bag slapped to his fangs so that he can snack a little bit. And he doesn't know that she knows that immortals exist, and he doesn't know that she knows the difference between good immortals and rogue immortals, which is drinking bagged blood versus preying on humans. The other thing I like about Lynsay Sands and about this book is the chemistry is always really, really good. The thing about life mates is they have a shared passion sort of thing, so once they start to touch each other physically like a kiss, they can feel what the other person is feeling, and which apparently heightens the pleasure, and it goes back and forth and so on and so forth. It's a romance thing. I'm willing to suspend my disbelief on this. So they've got that going for it, but Santo is a very uncommunicative person, and that's causing a little bit of friction between them right now because she wants to talk to him and he's just kind of giving one-syllable answers. So she thinks that he's no longer interested, la la la, you know, typical romance stuff to keep them apart. Now, the one thing that I'm wondering about is that immortal next door. Is it Drexler, the villain from that last arc, or is it somebody from, what was it, the Brass Circle, I think I said? I mean, I'm super interested in this Brass Circle now, so how interesting would it be if the villain next door winds up being from Pet and her sister Quinn's past and having tracked them down sort of thing? So I'm making chili, which means that I am going to be listening to more of this book while I do it. I have a pretty low-key day going on today, seeing as Mark is recovering at home. He had surgery a couple days ago because he broke his arm. So I'm just here kind of prepping some meals for when he's hungry again in the future, and working a little bit, and staying away from the winter. Let's hibernate. So I'm about halfway through The Trouble with Vampires by Lynsay Sands, and I have to say so far her balance of the thriller / mystery to romance elements are completely skewed. We had a little bit of that mystery at the beginning where it's set up. I'm guessing what's going to happen at the end, because since then it's been largely her romance with Santo. And although I do love the romance with Santo, don't get me wrong, I just feel like it's probably going to come and blindside me at the end whenever something actually does happen. Especially because at this point, Pet has decided that it is actually very dangerous to keep her nephew next to the house of a rogue immortal, so she's going to leave. So she took her nephew and went to her apartment, and Santo came with her, and there's lots of romance. In order for anything to really happen, somebody would have had to follow her there. And there is a little bit of a mystery element insofar as there was somebody trying to get into her nephew's room. So obviously they want him for something, or they think he saw something, or something to that effect. But that hasn't been repeated. It's only been used as a way to propel the main characters together, basically. It forces them into close proximity, which facilitates the romance, which I love, but I was hoping for just a little bit more mystery in this. almost got to a part in the book where, trying to keep the minimal amount of spoilers possible, I really don't think this part is a spoiler, Pet's mother comes in, and Pet's mother also knows about immortals, and she doesn't really see a distinction between rogue immortals and immortals who have rules and drink bag blood, etc., and so on. So she basically walks in and tells Pet, now you're leaving him and you're never going to see him again. And I am hoping that this is going to be the part where they tell me more about the brass freaking circle. It's going to happen. So I have a little bit under 3 hours left of The Trouble with Vampires. Why are you leaving, baby? Why are you leaving? Oh, hi. I'll take that. It's mine now. Thanks. Thanks. I always wanted this. Thanks. And I will say that I have learned more about the brass circles, so yay. Not a whole lot about them, but at least you make it difficult for me to talk to people. So I did learn more about the brass circle, not a whole lot more, but more about Pet's past and how she knew about immortals and such and so on. So I am satisfied on that account. And I left off at a point where it's getting really tense and maybe something's about to happen. So I am over the trope where the one protagonist, usually the hero, walks away from the other protagonist because they believe that they are saving them and it is for their own good. This also makes me rethink something that I have in one of my works in progress, but we won't talk about that. We are talking about The Trouble with Vampires, and yeah, that was a little bit of a spoiler, but at one point, Santo realizes or believes that if he stays with Pet, that he will hurt her. So he leaves. Okay, I didn't read past that yet. I'm still trying to talk to myself and figure out if I want to go through it. Do I want to finish the last hour of the book? Because that trope is just making me want to put it aside. I know how it ends. They end up together. I don't know if the villain is ever caught or if he escapes and we're going to see him in a further book. So that's a reason to keep reading. I know that by the time I post this video, I will have already decided one way or another, but if you were in my shoes, would you keep reading this book or would you put it down? I'm curious. I'm not 100% decided. I might still go back to it tonight. For the moment, I have some very delicious peach cobbler to eat. I'm going to listen to more nonfiction, as that is my resolution to do every day, and I have work to be done, even though it is 7 o'clock in the evening. So I slept on it and I decided to finish reading The Trouble with Vampires, and I'm really glad that I did because that took a twist that I did not see coming. It ended really strong. That one part that I got really mad at and didn't want to continue reading on because of, ended up not really being an issue because of the way it ended up being handled. Pet eventually realized why this decision was made for him to leave her for her own good, and she has enough agency that she took her own measures to get their happy ever after together. So I really liked that about it, even though he is clearly an idiot. Is this a book that I would recommend? I'm gonna say no, just because I have many more examples of Argento novels that I like better. For instance, only a couple weeks ago, I was over the moon talking about Immortal Born, which is the latest one in the series, because I found that it was so original. If you haven't read an Arjun novel before, Immortal Born is actually a pretty good entry into the series because it is after one of those arcs that I was talking about, and although there are recurring characters from previous books, that could actually point you towards whose stories you want to see next, because in romance it's assumed that they get a happy ever after anyway, so the fact that they are together and happy years after their story is not a surprise. It's now January the 5th, and I am moving on to my third book of the year. I am super happy about this, and I will talk to you about that in another video. I hope you had a wonderful start to your year, and until next time, happy reading. I was going to talk about books, but if you want to go first.